I don't want to interrupt you.
No.
All right. Okay. So, I want to talk about the fact that we have a situation developing in the UK that really should be setting off alarm bells for all of us. In the recent election that I tried to talk about last week, I think it was in Gorton and Denton off the top of my head, the one that the Greens won, we saw corruption of our democratic practices. What we've seen this week is Parliament voting to get rid of our jury trials here in the UK. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a number of stories that should cause alarm to any sensible person about the corruption of our judiciary in this country. Now, the problem with these two things is that when your democratic systems are becoming corrupted, as we have seen in Gorton and Denton, as we are seeing in Tower Hamlets, what we end up with is an impossibility by which we can transition power peacefully. And when we see corruption in our courts, as we have started to see, ladies and gentlemen, it breaks down the raison d'etre for maintaining law and order. I don't know about you, but often when I see people just pushing through the barriers at the tube stations and not paying, it raises a question within my heart as to why the hell am I paying the fare when other people are just pushing through? Well, that kind of attitude permeates out into other kinds of crimes and other kinds of trials. In Zechariah 7:9 it says, "Thus says Yahweh of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another." It's an injunction within the Christian faith that our judgments about what is right and what is wrong, about what is criminal and not criminal, about who is guilty and who is innocent, should be done upon the basis of truth, not the basis of your politics, not the basis of your attempts to re-engineer society according to your desired outcomes, but based upon the facts and are based upon the law. Since the 1970s, ladies and gentlemen, we've seen the continued de-Christianization of our nation. Things like the liberalization of divorce laws, the legalization of contraception, the legalization of abortion, which just this year they tried to legalize up to birth, ladies and gentlemen. The ending of Sunday trading laws, the permissibility of gay marriage, a creation of a state without borders, the attempt to legalize euthanasia, and now, this week, we've seen the Labour government try to, and successfully, abolish jury trials for pretty much any crime that doesn't result in a sentence that's 2 years or more. This is the very example, this is the very fruit of the de-Christianization of our nation, as we lose touch with the Christian story and the values and the doctrines that it gives rise to, and the laws that those values and doctrines informed. In Leviticus 19:15 it says, "You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor." It is a fundamental Christian principle that everyone is equal under the law and should be judged based according to the law, without preference to the great or the small, but simply to establish justice in the land to accord with righteousness. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, we have abolished jury trials in this land when on a regular basis, daily, 64 courts stay empty. Ostensibly, the Labour tyranny passed this reform to our legal system for the purposes of expediting justice, ladies and gentlemen. But I would say to you that any sensible government should seek to expedite justice by using the resources available before abandoning a custom and a tradition that has proven useful for the last 800 years. I'm sure you've all heard of the principle, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Jury trials are broken, as we will see, but the cause of justice is not served by their abolition. We are seeking to replace a tried and tested system of law and order in our land. And for what? To hand over power over our lives to magistrates and judges who are often politicized, as we will see. In Micah 6:8 it says, "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." The New Covenant and Old Covenant establish for us the premises upon which justice is to be applied. It gives us a moral and ethical code by which to form our laws. As we have abandoned that story and those truths, law and order in our courts has become increasingly partisan, increasingly based upon whether you are the minority group, whether you are the oppressed, whether, ladies and gentlemen, the judges are involved in politics for your particular group and cause. And we're seeing, ladies and gentlemen, corruption in our courts. Let me give you some examples. Lucy Connolly was sentenced for 2 years in prison for an ill-considered tweet that she quickly deleted. And yet, Musa Kadri, who tried to stab someone with a knife for a perfectly legal act of burning a Quran, ladies and gentlemen, as part of a protest, walked away from prison unsentenced, with a suspended sentence, ladies and gentlemen. And yet the CPS had pursued to the High Court a man that did not break the law in any way, ladies and gentlemen. The Quran has no legal protection under British law whatsoever. We have seen examples, ladies and gentlemen, where people are being put into prison for tweets, and yet people who put into prison for tweets where they're said to be inciting violence, and that Labour Party councillors who are calling for opposition protesters to have their throats slit are able to walk free. We've seen examples, ladies and gentlemen, where protesters who participate in public vandalism, destroying public statues and chucking them into rivers, are able to walk free, and even groups that are supporting terrorist organizations that are breaking into private companies assaulting police officers with sledgehammers, breaking and fracturing their backs, or able to walk out of our courts, and yet people who are participating in legitimate protests and who swear at the police are sentenced to prison for years, where they are bullied to the point of committing suicide. How does any of this look like justice, ladies and gentlemen?
That's it.
In Deuteronomy 16:20 it says, "Justice and only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving to you." The British people are under judgment because they no longer pursue or care about justice. And so they are losing their land and their inheritance because they abandon justice for politics, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the jury trial was established in Magna Carta, a document fashioned by the church that limited the power of the sovereign and ensured that the sovereign was obliged to pursue justice and to respect the rights of his subjects, even to his own disadvantage. But under this Labour tyranny and under the erosion of our Christian culture and its replacement by a progressive culture, we have seen that even our jury system is being corrupted. That our jury system is letting people free that are patently guilty according to the evidence, as seen by what happened to Palestine Action. We have lost our sense of justice in this land, and as we lose it, we increasingly encourage more injustice. Because as one party and one group see partisan judges and partisan juries, all the more likely it encourages the other group to be partisan in their judgments as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the danger that we face today in our country. It says in Psalm 99:4, "The king in his might loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob." It is the duty of rulers everywhere to establish justice fairly, equally, and unbiasedly in the land. When we see the Crown prosecution pursuing those that have offended Islam with more aggression than it is pursuing those that have commissioned and participated in the rape of children, ladies and gentlemen, then we have to say that there is something rotten inside of the Crown Prosecution Service. We have to say that there is something rotten in the British courts, in the British magistrates, and in the British jury system. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to re-establish an order of justice that is framed according to Christian values and Christian ethics, in which everyone is judged equally under the law, regardless of whether they are poor or rich, regardless of whether they're a celebrity or a nobody, regardless of whether they are campaigning for or against Palestine, for or against the environment, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
Because what we have seen in our country is the fraying of justice, and that will lead to disorder and criminality in our own society. If I feel the injustice of the system, I am less likely to respect the system. If I can't trust the system to transition peacefully, democratically, through one party to the other, I am more likely to bear arms to change the system by force. Our elites are sleepwalking us into a civil war. Our elites are sleepwalking us into civil disorder, because once people lose their respect for the courts, they lose their respect for law and order. This is an incredibly serious matter that we should all be concerned with, and we should drive to the top of the political agenda at the next election, so that every party is forced to take a stance on how they're going to deal with it. And so I want to make the following propositions. That, number one, when we have a sensible government in place, those magistrates and those judges that were overtly political in their judgments should be prosecuted for corruption of office, sentenced and placed in prison. Two, that all examples of corrupt jury sentences should be reviewed and retried. Three, that juries now should be trained before they enter the courts about the ideas of natural justice and the Christian principles and philosophy upon which it is based in the passing of their judgments. Four, that we reconnect the idea of justice to overt Christian teachings, values, doctrines and practices. That those judges, magistrates that are not willing to adhere to it be removed from office. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions on the topic? Going once. It's a good question.
What's the question, Bobzilla?
The question is, who as Christians should we be voting for?
Okay.
Now, normally at this point, I'd say the Christian People's Alliance, but the Christian People's Alliance is badly led. Its leader, Sid Cordell, needs to step down and give someone else the reins of that party, but that certainly is one option. But these days it's become vogue that many right-wing parties are canvassing for the Christian vote. Restories, Reformies, Advance UKs and UKIPs, as well as the Christian People's Alliance, as well as the Family Party in Scotland. And so we as Christians should look for the party that has the most mature attitude to Christian lawmaking. Not someone that chucks out trifles at us like we'll stop churches being turned into mosques, but someone that will pass weighty Christian law, like we're going to outlaw abortion, that we're going to redefine marriage to be between one man and one woman, and we're going to police polygamy or other such examples. And that party that is more strident is the one that Christians should vote for. Any other questions on the topic?
Even from the chat, say from the chat as well, Bob.
And from the chat.
Yeah, go Bobzilla.
Any questions on the topic?
Which one of the three parties or four parties you mentioned is closest to what you're suggesting?
Currently at this month, so the question is which one of the parties is closest to how I described? The answer is I don't know. I am not aware. But one of the ways you could judge them is by looking at what Christian advisors they are recruiting and researching what Christian advisors they've recruited to see how well informed they are on the Christian tradition and the Christian life. What, sorry? My view on Restore UK is that it should commit itself to a deep understanding and practice of the Christian faith. There's no point saying that Christianity is important if you're not going to follow it up with your policies. So, for example, one of the ways that you could judge a Christian political party by how seriously Christian it is how concerned are they for helping persecuted Christians around the world, ladies and gentlemen. Any other questions on the topic of the corruption of our legal system and our response to it? Going once.
Going once, so.
Going twice.
Going twice, so.
Going 3 times.
Strike out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you today
What?
a challenge to every Muslim in this park.
Challenge.
Answer me this question.